Hi and welcome to another video. If you are new here, my name is Tash and I am the owner of the sewing pattern brand NH Patterns. And today I'm going to show you how to sew the Amelia dress. In this video, I'll be showing you how to sew view A of the Amelia dress. View B is pretty much the same, however, it just has a plain bodice instead of a gathered bodice. If you're making view B, the construction method is exactly the same, so you can continue to follow this tutorial for view B as well. Just remember that you will need your plain bodice instead of your gathered bodice. I was going to add view C into this video, however, it ended up making the video too long, so I decided to remove that from the video. Sorry about the cat, he keeps head bumping me because he wants more food. Truth be told, I also really didn't like the view C that I made. I chose the wrong colouring for my skin tone, so the dress kind of washes me out a little bit. I also didn't really pick my right size, so it's a little bit tight on me. So I'm going to remake that. I also might make it into a midi length, and then I can show you how I do that on camera as well. With this dress, you can mix and match different parts. So for example, if you didn't want a flippy skirt, you could use the lining pieces and slightly lengthen them to make a more straight styled skirt. If you wanted the gathered bodice, but you wanted the full back, because there's not technically a view for that, you can absolutely do that. You just need to follow the view C. So for anything open back, you'll follow this tutorial. For anything closed back, you would follow the view C tutorial. Fabric wise, you're going to want something quite drapey, something lightweight. So you want something like a viscose or a rayon, crepe, silk, satin, that sort of thing, something quite fluid. There's plenty of options out there. You just don't want anything too stiff and you don't want anything too heavy, otherwise your gathers aren't going to gather up properly. If you are making a plain bodice version, or maybe not the flippy skirt, you're making a straight skirt, something like a lightweight cotton works really well as well, or a lightweight linen. They're both really nice options for the plain bodice. Because they're not gathered, you don't need to worry about the bulk quite as much. You will also need a zipper, so depending on the view you're making, it will depend on the size. So for this view, so view A, B, anything with an open back, you want a 9-inch invisible zipper or 23 centimeters. You'll also want some bias binding. Now, there's a table in the instructions booklet that shows you how much you'll need when you get to that point. I make my own from the scraps left over of the fabric that I had, but you can buy bias binding if you prefer, especially if you're making something plain. It's not always necessary to make your own. Other than that, I don't think there's much else to tell you, so let's get sewing. Because the main panels of this skirt are partly cut on the bias, it's a good idea to stabilise these edges before sewing so that we can avoid the pieces stretching out of shape. Apply stay tape or strips of fusible interfacing to the edges of the front centre, front side, back centre and back side pieces. You can see here I am ironing some lightweight fusible interface into the wrong side. You only need to do this on your main skirt, not on your lining. Once you have applied your stay tape, overlock all of these edges to neaten. Also overlock the centre back edge of your back centre skirt pieces. I actually forgot to overlock my centre back edge here, so I'll do it later in the video. With right sides of the fabric facing, place your front skirt side panel, the side with the single notch, onto your front centre skirt panel. Match up your notch and pin the entire edge together. Then sew together using a 1 centimeter or 3/8 of an inch seam allowance. Repeat this on your other front skirt side panel, then press these seams open. Your front skirt should now look like this. We now need to make up the back of the skirt. With right side to the fabric facing, place your back skirt onto your front skirt, matching up the double notches on the back side seam with the double notches on the front side seam. Sew together, then press your seams open. Repeat for the other side. Make sure you're sewing the back centrepiece to the shorter side of the back side panel here, as it's easy to get confused which side is which. Repeat for your other back skirt centre and side panels, then press these seams open. With right side to the fabric facing, place your back skirt onto your front skirt, matching up the double notches on the back side seam with the double notches on the front side seam. Sew together, then press your seams open. Then repeat for the other side. Your main skirt is now all sewn up and it's time to move on to your lining skirt. You'll sew these pieces together in the same way you sewed your main skirt, except this time you don't need to apply stay tape. Overlock all the side edges except your centre back edges, then sew your front sides to front centre, your back sides to back centre, then your back skirt to front skirt at the side seams, and press all your seams open. Now your skirt is all sewn up, we'll move on to constructing the bodice and bodice lining. Starting with the back bodice, sew the darts. To do this, fold your fabric with right sides together, matching up your dart legs, which are the widest point of your dart, and then sew from the widest part all the way to the dart point. Backstitch at the start of the dart, but when you get to the dart point, leave a long tail end of thread and then tie your dart to finish the point. Do this on both back bodices and then repeat for your lining. Press all of your darts towards the side seams. With right sides facing, place your front side lining onto your front centre lining. Match up the notch and pin together the rest of the seam. Sew together using your normal 1 cm or 3/8 of an inch seam allowance. Press this seam open, then repeat for the other side. If you are making view B, repeat this step on your main bodice. Now we'll move on to your main front bodice, but keep your front bodice lining pieces handy as we'll use them in a second. On your front bodice, gather the neckline between the notches. Then also gather the bottom edge between the notches. To gather, start by setting your stitch length to the longest length possible on your machine. In my case, the longest stitch length is 5. Then, starting at one of your notches, sew all the way to the other notch, making sure not to backstitch at either end and also making sure you leave long tail ends of thread at both ends. Sew a second row of stitching a few millimetres away from the first in exactly the same way. 2 rows of gather stitching gather the fabric a bit nicer than just one. We want the neckline edge to gather up so that it matches the neckline edge of the bodice lining. Tie off your threads at one end, then take your top 2 threads from the other end, the threads on the right side of the fabric, and gently pull the fabric along the thread to gather up the fabric. When you have the gathers to the right length, you can knot the threads to stop the gathers unravelling. Now do exactly the same for the bottom edge of the bodice and make sure this also matches the lining. With right sides of the fabric facing, place your front bodice onto your back bodice and sew together at the shoulder seam. Repeat for the other side and then repeat on your lining. Then press all these shoulder seams open. Next up is the sleeves. Firstly, hem your sleeve along the long curved edge. There is a 1 cm seam allowance here and I personally like to do a small rolled hem, but you can choose a different method if you prefer. Now we're going to gather again. So set your machine to the longest stitch length possible and sew 2 rows of gather stitches between the 2 notches either side of the sleeve. Ignore the centre notch for now. We're going to gather the amount we need to fit onto the bodice, so lay your main bodice out in front of you as shown here with the right side of the fabric facing you. Place your sleeve onto the armhole of your bodice with the right sides facing. Match up the centre notch with your shoulder seam, then gather the sleeve until the end points of the sleeve match the notches on your bodice armhole. When matching one of the ends up to your back bodice, there are double notches. Your sleeve should be placed directly in between the notches. Pin in place, then baste to secure. I personally haven't basted here and went straight into the next step, but it's a little fiddly, so I'd recommend doing so. Make sure to also repeat this on your other bodice piece. Take your bodice lining and place over the top of the main bodice and sleeve with right side of the bodice lining facing the right side of the main bodice, sandwiching your sleeve in between. Pin this in place and then starting at one side seam, sew all the way around the armhole until you reach the other side seam. Once you've done that, trim this seam by about half. Then repeat for your other side. Turn your bodice to the right side and give your armhole a good press. Then put your bodice back as it was before, with the main bodice and lining right sides together with your sleeve sandwiched in between. Then sew your main bodice and lining together at the front centre and the back centre. Repeat for the other side. Turn both bodices through to the right side and give your front seams and back seams a good press. Your left and right bodices are now pretty much all sewn together, we just need to sew up the side seams. Before you do this though, take a moment to remove any visible gather stitches from your sleeves. Lay your bodice out flat with the right side facing you. Fold the back bodice onto the front bodice with right sides together. Match up the side seams of the main fabric only and pin together. Once you've pinned the main fabric front and back side seams together, you'll get to the underarm seam between the lining and main fabric. Match up the side seams of the front and back lining fabric and pin those together as well. Starting at one end, sew all the way up to the underarm seam, then continue across the seam until you reach the other side. Press your seams towards the back of your bodice and then repeat these steps on your other bodice piece. Now your bodice is all sewn up, we will add it to the skirt. Firstly, I would recommend sewing the bottom edge of the main bodice and lining together, as it will make it a little easier to manage in this next step. I haven't done it in the video, but it does make things less fiddly. Mark the centre point of the front of your skirt at the top edge with a small notch or pin, then lay your skirt out with the right side facing you. Take one of your bodices and with right sides facing, place it onto your skirt, matching up the edge of the front bodice with the mark you just made at the centre front of the skirt. Continue pinning your bodice to the skirt the rest of the way around to the back. The back of your bodice should meet the notch at the back centre panel of the skirt. Sew your bodice to the skirt. We'll now put the zipper into the back of the skirt. If you haven't already done so, start by overlocking your skirt's centre back edge, making sure that the top edge is lying flat. The top of the skirt may want to naturally roll down by 1 cm due to the seam we just sewed. To avoid this, gently roll your seam up towards the bodice while you start overlocking. When looking at an invisible or concealed zipper, the side with the teeth is the wrong side and the side that is concealed is the right side. Unzip your zipper, then place your zipper onto the left-hand side of the dress with the right side of the zipper and fabric facing. You should place your zipper so that the zipper teeth are 1.5 cm away from the centre back edge of the skirt, and the top stopper of the zipper should be just over 1 cm down from the top of the skirt. Pin in place the side of the zipper tape that is closest to the centre back edge. Then change your machine foot to either a zipper foot or an invisible zipper foot and sew the zipper tape to the skirt as close as you can to the zipper teeth. You can also gently roll the zipper teeth away from the foot as you sew. This will allow you to get close to the zipper teeth, especially if you're using a regular zipper foot instead of an invisible zipper foot. When you get close to the stopper, make sure to move your zipper pull out the way so you don't catch it and break your needle. You won't be able to sew all the way to the bottom of the tape, so just go as far as you can. Lay your skirt out so that you are looking at both centre back edges of the skirt next to each other. Take the loose side of the zipper and place it onto the other side of the skirt with right sides of the fabric and zipper facing. Make sure your zipper is 1.5 cm away from the edge and that your top stopper is the same distance from the top of the skirt as the other side. Pin in place, then sew this side. Zip up your zipper and make sure you are happy with the placement of it. Then turn your dress inside out. Match up the ends of your zipper stitching and pin together. I personally pinch the fabric at the bottom of the zipper to find the stitching endpoints. Pull the end of the zipper out the way and then pin. This can be a little difficult sometimes as it can be a little bulky, but just pin it together as close as you can. Once you've pinned this point, continue pinning all the way to the bottom of the hem, then sew from the base of the zipper down to the hem and press this seam open. Ideally, you should do this with a regular zipper foot to keep the tension right, but you can always start the stitching with a one-sided foot, then change to a regular foot if you're finding it hard to get close. I also always start stitching a few millimetres before the end of my zipper stitching, as this stops holes at the bottom of the zipper. Turn your dress inside out and measure your zipper stitching from the top of the skirt until you reach the end of the stitching near the zip stopper. As you are using a 9" or 23cm zipper here, the measurement should be close to that. It's always best to measure though, just to be sure. We are now going to move on to the lining. Firstly, overlock the centre back edges of the lining if you haven't done so already. Then fold your lining with right sides together and match up your centre back edges. Using the measurement you took from your zipper stitching, measure down from the top of the skirt lining until this point. Then sew from this point to the hem using a 1.5cm seam allowance and press this seam open. Turn your main dress right side out, then fold your bodice down onto the right side of the skirt, with the right side of the bodice facing the right side of the skirt. By doing this, we will be exposing the seam that we originally sewed when attaching the bodice to the skirt. Unzip your zipper and make sure you can see the centre back overlocked edge of your skirt. Then, making sure your lining is wrong side out, slide it over the top of the main dress, matching up the top edge of both your main skirt and lining skirt. The right side of your main skirt and lining should be together with your bodice sandwiched in between the two. Match up the centre back overlocked edge of your skirt lining with the centre back overlocked edge of your main skirt. Your lining will be covering your zipper. Pin alongside the zipper, making sure that you are pinning on the side of the zipper teeth that is closest to the centre back overlocked edge. You will be pinning through the main fabric, zipper tape and lining fabric. Switch to a one-sided foot or zipper foot and sew alongside the zipper, making sure to sew on the side of the zipper teeth closest to the centre back edge. Sew until you reach your zip stopper and then repeat for the other side. Once you've sewn both sides of the zipper, pin all the way around the top of the skirt, matching up the top edge of both the main and lining skirts. Make sure your bodice is sandwiched in between the two skirt layers and nothing else is caught within the seam, like the sleeve, because I've done that way too many times. Once you're happy, start at one of the centre back edges, sew over the top of your zipper, be gentle here and use the hand wheel if possible to avoid your needle snapping, and continue sewing all the way around the top of the skirt until you get to the other centre back edge. Again, being careful when you go over the zipper. Trim your corners, then turn to the right side and gently push out your corners. Push your lining to the inside of the dress and give your seam a good press. Then top stitch along the top of the skirt to hold your lining and main fabric together. You can now remove your gather stitches from this edge of the bodice. To finish the neckline and create the tie at the back neck, we are going to use bias binding. I personally like to create my own for this out of the same fabric as the main dress. You will need double fold bias binding and the finished folded width should be 1.25 centimeters or half an inch. If you are making your own, you should cut your strips 5 centimeters in width, so they will fold down to the required width. For the required length for your size, please see the table in the instructions booklet. Here I have cut multiple strips at a 45-degree angle to the grain line. This 45-degree angle is known as the bias and creates a stretch along an otherwise unstretchy fabric. I will cut multiple strips and then sew them together to create one long strip. At first it seems that you need to cut off the ends to square them so that they can be joined, but that's not the case. If your ends are cut on a 45-degree angle, you can simply place one strip over the other with right sides together, like I'm showing you here. We will sew these together with a 1 cm seam allowance. Continue adding pieces until you get the desired length of binding, then press all these seams open. Trim off the excess. We'll get our binding started by folding it in half and pressing into place. Then we'll fold both edges into the centre and press again. I'm going to use a bias binding maker to complete the rest, but if you don't have one, you can just continue to keep pressing the same way I am showing here. Once this is all folded and pressed into place, we just need to neaten the edges so we're not left with a raw edge that could fray. Start by trimming your ends. We now just want a standard straight edge rather than diagonal cut. Open out the end of your bias binding and fold the raw edge to the wrong side of the fabric by 1 cm. Press into place, then put the rest of your binding back in place and give it another press. We're now ready to finish the neckline. Match up the neckline edges of your main fabric and lining fabric. Pin in place, then using a 1 cm seam allowance, sew the necklines together. Then trim your seam allowance so it's about half the size. Find your centre front neckline points and match them up next to each other. Then sew a couple of stitches across the two neckline points to join them. Fold your entire binding strip in half lengthways to find the centre point. Then mark this point. Lay your binding in front of you with the wrong side of the binding facing you and place the centre of your bodice neckline to match the centre of the binding. Your neckline raw edge should be placed to meet the centre fold of your binding. Pin this in place, then continue to pin the binding all along the neckline. Fold over your binding so that the neckline is enclosed within the binding and the centre fold of the binding runs along the top of the neckline. Repin all the way around the neckline. Check that your neckline is completely enclosed, then continue to pin the loose end of the binding in half until your binding strip is completely folded and all raw edges are concealed. Starting at one end of the binding, sew all the way along the open edge of the binding until you reach the other end. When you get to the neckline, just be careful to make sure your neckline is totally enclosed when sewing. All that's left now is the hem. Overlock your lining and your main skirt hems individually, not together, then turn them both up by 1 cm and stitch into place. Give the hem a good press and that's it, you're done. I hope you enjoyed this tutorial and don't forget to like and subscribe for more sewing tutorials and other sewing content. Thanks for watching!